Please do feel free to put some questions in the chat. I've got some colleagues who are going to be keeping an eye on that for us, and we're going to also have some polls to see how much you all know about genomic medicine. So I'm expecting a few people will be joining over the next few minutes, so I'll just spend a couple of minutes introducing myself and saying welcome, and then we'll move on with the presentation. So welcome to East Genomics session today for Genomic Conversation Week. This session is going to be about genomic medicine for your patients seeking support and finding out more. It's fine for asking questions. Please just pop them in the chat and my colleagues will draw them to my attention. I can't quite see the chat while I'm presenting. So do feel free to ask questions, and we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So what we're hoping to do today is give everybody an overview of genomic medicine and also give you some pointers as healthcare professionals on how to support your patients, and also to find out more about this emerging area of healthcare for yourself, for your own continuing professional development. So good afternoon, my name is Gemma Chandratillake. I'm the Education and Training Lead for East Genomics. If you're not familiar with East Genomics, I will be explaining more about what that entity is later on in the talk. I'm also the current chair for the British Society of Genetic Medicine and the Cambridge Rare Disease Network. So welcome to our session today. What we're hoping to cover is, what is genomic medicine? No question is too basic. Please do ask questions in the chat if anything's not clear to you. We also want to make sure that we let you know where you as healthcare professionals can get support for the care of your patients, and where you can also learn more, where you can go to learn more as a healthcare professional as well. So when I think about genomic medicine, what I like to do is start it off and think about the idea of personalising medical care. So back in 2016, there was a NHS strategy document called Improving Outcomes Through Personalised Medicine. You can Google this document, and it's just a very high level document, but what it talks about is how in sort of traditional approaches to delivering medicine, delivering healthcare, we've taken a one-size-fits-all approach. And we know that that's not the most effective or the most efficient way of actually getting better outcomes. So we want to be moving towards taking a much more personalised approach to delivering healthcare. So moving from that one-size-fits-all, where we're based on symptoms, to being a lot smarter about how we deliver healthcare. So we want to bring in more of our science to help us deliver healthcare in a smarter, more personalised way. So that's really sort of the basis to a lot of this that I'll be talking about. So if we rewind for those of you who are not so familiar with DNA and genetics, you'll know that our body is made up of cells, and inside those cells we have chromosomes, which are made up of DNA. And DNA is the information containing molecule in our body. It's the instruction manual, if you like, for making our bodies and making them work properly. And each person has 20,000 genes, and the genes that we have are encoded in the DNA of each cell. And we have 2 copies of each of our genes. One is inherited from each of our parents. So when we talk about genomic medicine, what we really mean is using the DNA sequence information from an individual's genome to inform their medical care. And we can use this information in lots of different ways. We can use information to make a diagnosis for somebody and to provide some prognostic guidance. We can use this information to predict the likelihood that someone might develop a healthcare condition and therefore try to prevent that. We can use this information for family planning purposes. And also there's quite a new emerging field called Pharmacogenetics. And this is where we use the information to inform on the medicines that we give people. So we can think about our medications, and we can try and use DNA information from an individual's genome to predict the efficacy of a particular medication for a particular individual, and also to try to prevent adverse drug reactions. So I'm using the word genomic and I'm also using the word gene, and I've been using them quite interchangeably, but just to clarify what we mean by those terms. So when we think about genome, we're thinking about all of a person's genetic information. So that's their DNA, and that DNA contains it contains their genes, but there's lots of other DNA in a genome as well as just the genes. And when we think about a gene, that's a specific part of the genome that's required for the production of a particular functional product. So we have about 20,000 genes in our genome. So these are sort of individual instructions, and the genome is all of the DNA, if you can think about it that way. So when we use words like genetics and genomics, when we say the word genetics, we tend to think in terms of a single gene. And when we use the word genomics, we tend to think about the whole genome, or many genes at least, at once. And the reason we are now doing genomics rather than just genetics has been driven by technological advances. So there have been huge advances in DNA sequencing technology, which means that we can look at lots of different genes all the way up to the whole genome at once. So instead of having to do very specific genetic tests, we can do very broad genomic tests now due to the new technologies that we have available to us. So what does this mean? Well, our DNA sequence is made up of 3 billion letters of DNA. It is quite literally a code. It's an instruction code. We can't just, as humans, we can't just look at it and read it like this. We have to make sense of it. But essentially, it's a 4-letter code. There are 4 types of letters in the DNA alphabet, and there are 3 billion of them in our genome. And so if you to print out a copy of the genome, it would just look like this for 3 billion letters. So what we actually do, though, is we look at individual patients' genome, and we compare an individual patient's genome against a reference genome, and we look for differences between the two, and we call those genetic variants or genomic variants. And it's these that we really try and make sense of in terms of healthcare. So most of our genome is exactly the same as everybody else's. So the vast majority, well, all of us share most of our DNA. So we only have 0.1% of our genome variant from one person to the next. But because our genome is big, because it's 3 billion letters big, 0.1% equates to 3 million differences, or 3 million variants. So that's quite a lot of information. So if we were to look at a patient's genome against the reference, we would find 3 million variants that we would want to try and make sense of with respect to their healthcare. So each of our genome or each of our DNA sequence is different from each other, and most of these 3 million variants don't alter the function of genes. So they may not do anything at all. And that's really the job of genomic laboratories. What their role is to, first of all, sequence that DNA and find those variants, and then they must understand those variants and try and interpret them to decide whether a particular variant is likely to be meaningful for a patient's healthcare, maybe because it affects the function of a gene, or whether that particular variant is just sort of a normal genetic variant in the population that doesn't really mean anything for health. So these are the roles of the genomics laboratories in the NHS. So when we think about genomics in NHS care or in healthcare, there are sort of certain areas where we apply genomic testing. And I'm going to go through some of the more common ones today. So the first one we'll talk about is when we're thinking about rare disease. So rare diseases or rare conditions are rare by hence the name, and each of these conditions affects less than 1 in 2,000 people in the population. And there are lots and lots of these conditions. So whilst each of them is very rare, actually cumulatively, rare conditions affect a lot of people. So about 1 in 17 people, or about 3 million in the UK. But because each of these conditions is rare, there's a real lack of awareness of any one of them. So we tend to not have heard of them, and we tend to not be very good at diagnosing patients with these conditions because they're rare and we don't see them very often. So traditionally they've been very difficult to diagnose, and you really kind of needed to understand which gene to look at because most of these are genetic in nature. So you wouldn't really know where to start as a healthcare professional, and only some very specialized healthcare professionals called clinical geneticists may be able to make a stab at which gene to look at. But now, because we've got genomic technology, instead of looking at each gene and having to know which one to look at, we can actually look at lots of genes at once. And that can be really, really helpful when we're trying to diagnose a patient who we think may have a rare condition. And the aim here of using genomics is it means that we can really improve healthcare for these patients. So because there's been a lack of awareness, and because they're difficult to diagnose, it generally has taken patients years, around 4 years on average, to get a diagnosis from presenting to care. So we obviously would like to change that and get diagnosis for all of these people a lot more quickly, and genomics can really help with that. And if we can get a genetic diagnosis, it can be really helpful for that patient, because we can obviously guide their care with any treatments or preventative measures. We can provide some prognostic or anticipatory guidance about how the condition might develop. We can also stop sending them round and round our healthcare system trying to figure out what is going on for them. And that is both psychologically costly to the patient, but also financially costly to the NHS. So we would like to get a diagnosis in a lot more streamlined manner. And then having a diagnosis can really provide an answer and a sense of closure to the patients and the families as well. Some patients may use this information for family planning purposes. We can give genetic counselling to explain how the condition may occur in the family, which other family members might be at risk of the condition, or what might happen if the patient or their family members are having children, what their options might be. There may be other family members who might be at risk of developing this condition, and we may be able to make early interventions or preventative care for them. Having an actual name for the condition can mean that the patient can participate in a more relevant support or advocacy group. And also, there's increasingly specific clinical trials for these rare conditions that are available if you know which condition you have, which is obviously the first step in being involved in research or clinical trials. So that's the application of genomics for rare disease and making diagnosis for people. I'll just now move on to another application of genomics in medicine, which is genomics for cancer. And in this situation, what we're doing is sequencing the DNA sequence of the tumor. So cancer is actually caused by changes in the genome, in the DNA of cells, that cause a tumor to grow cause those cells to grow in an unregulated way and form a tumor. So if we sequence the DNA from the tumor, it can actually really help us get a more precise diagnosis for that cancer. We can be more precise about understanding what type of cancer the patient has, and that can guide the treatment and the management of cancer. It means that we can choose drugs or treatment options for the patient that may work for them, and we can also avoid some of these quite harsh treatments like chemotherapies that may not work if we know precisely what kind of cancer somebody has. And it also means that patients can access appropriate clinical trials, because more and more clinical trials for cancer have a genetic test that's required to enter that clinical trial. So this really opens up treatment options for the patient. Another way that we can use genomics in healthcare is the area of medicine itself. So giving medicines, giving drugs. And this is called pharmacogenetics. So you will all know that different people respond to different medications in different ways. This is something that the general population intrinsically understand. We all know that not all medicines work for everybody the same way. And a lot of the differences in how drugs and medicines work for different people is due to their variations in their genome. So different people can be sensitive to a drug. It may be that they may need a different amount of the drug to achieve a particular therapeutic effect. And also, some drugs just don't work for some people at all. In that case, it's not great for the patient, and it's not great to give them a medicine that doesn't work either. And then we also know that people experience side effects to medications. And we know that this is a serious problem. So it's responsible for about 1 in 15 hospital admissions in the UK, adverse drug reactions. So we obviously would like to minimize this aspect of medicine administration as much as possible. So if we can give somebody a genetic test, and if we can tell before we give them the medicine that this medicine is not a good choice of medication for them, we could choose to give them a different medicine instead. So if we are able to do a genetic or a genomic test prior to the prescription of medication and use that information to advise which medication to give a patient, that field is called pharmacogenomics. And this is really an expanding field within the NHS as well. So I hope I've given some context of how we're able to use DNA information to inform on a patient's healthcare. This has all been encapsulated in an NHS Genomics Strategy that was published last year. And this really sets out the vision to use the power of genomics to predict, prevent and diagnose disease and to target treatment to all patients as part of routine care in the NHS. And in order to do that, we really need to make sure that NHS professionals, whoever they are in the system, doctors, nurses, allied healthcare professionals, pharmacists, understand a bit about genetics and genomics and how it can be used to benefit their patients. So this is the basis of the NHS Genomic Medicine Service, and the aim is to provide consistent and equitable care for the population. We do this by working to national standards. We have a national test directory which lists all of the genetic tests that are available, the genetic and genomic tests that are available to patients within the NHS, and these have been centrally commissioned. So, and the documents publicly available, so actually people can see what tests they're eligible for. And what we're also trying to do is provide a greater opportunity for more people to participate in research, trying to even that out so that it's not just people who are seen in large academic hospitals that get to participate in research studies, but also other patients as well, regardless of where they're being seen. And part of that research effort is collecting lots of DNA sequence from patients to create a national genomic knowledge base. And this is being used by academic researchers around the world, and also is carefully controlled, but is also used by, for example, pharmaceutical companies to do research and development for and things like clinical trial recruitment. So there's a lot of synergies in doing this work. So all the tests that are available in the NHS are listed in the National Genomic Test Directory, and there are two test directories. One is for rare conditions or rare diseases, and the other is for cancer. So you can just Google National Genomic Test Directory and you'll land on this page, and then you can see the test directories. When we think about how this service is being delivered, what has been done is that England has been divided up into 7 regions. So we are in the East, which covers the East Midlands and East of England. And these regions each have teams that are tasked with helping to embed the genomic medicine service across their region. So this is our region of East, and you can see all of the trusts, the 29 trusts, both hospital trusts and community trusts that we cover in the East. So if you are working for any of these trusts, or if you're working for any of the healthcare systems that work with these trusts, we are your team, East Genomics, so feel free to get in touch with us. We have a website, and this website has lots of information on it. It talks about how to order tests, but it also talks about, we also have a lot of patient stories and things from our region, and we talk about education and careers as well. So there's a sort of wealth of information here on our website. On the website, we also have some patient materials. We try and signpost people. So these are just examples of the patient materials that are available for patients who are having a whole genome sequencing test. And there are materials in lots of different languages, as well as easy read format as well. We also have some patient materials and some signposting to patient materials around the National Genomic Research Library as well. In terms of professional support, you can get in touch with the lab, the Genomic Laboratory Hub, the contact details for the lab if you're ordering tests or you need to talk with them about tests for your patients. The contact details for the lab is on the website. We also have 3 clinical genetics teams in our region in the East. So we have a team in Leicester, a team in Cambridge, and a team in Nottingham. And those clinical genetics teams consist of clinical geneticists and genetic counsellors. And they are professionals in the healthcare system who think about genetics and genomics all day long, every day. And if you have a patient that you think would be eligible for a genetic or genomic test, you could call them, and they run on-call services, and they will be able to talk you through that, whether or not you could order the test yourself or whether it's best to refer the patient to them. So those clinical genetics teams are there to support you in the healthcare system in the region of the East. And we also have a service users platform for our region. So this is the URL for that. It's a future NHS site, and that platform is a hub, a resource hub, if you like. We've got lots of talks and slides. This talk will be recorded and put on that hub as well. So lots of slides and talks from the healthcare professionals in our region about genomics on that users hub. So you're welcome to sign up for that. In terms of national efforts, there is a national genomic education program. They're tasked with trying to think about the healthcare system as a whole, how we can embed training for clinicians in their training pathways, and how we can upskill existing clinicians in genetics and genomics. On this website, you can just Google Genomics Education Program, or it will be linked from our website. You can, there's lots of online learning, there's lots of leaflets and infographics, sort of infographics as well, and videos all about genomics and different aspects of healthcare. One of the initiatives that they are developing is called GeNotes, and that is an in-clinic guide to genomics developed by clinicians for clinicians. So you can feel free to have a look at that. They're developing it for all specialisms. It's live for pediatrics and oncology at the moment. So there's some more specialisms coming soon. But this is really supposed to support you in the clinic and give you very clear pathways around what to do with the patient who's in front of you right now. So there's inner clinic resources, and there's also a knowledge hub as well to go a bit deeper. One of the other things to know about in our region is that we have an app. So in oncology, if you are in oncology, we've rolled this out, and you can download the app called QGenome, and this will help you do risk assessment for your patients and guidance on how to refer within our region or what tests to order. So it's aligned with the National Genomic Test Directory for oncology, for cancer. Another resource to be aware of is that the National Genomics Education Programme actually have commissioned master's programmes around the country, which are funded for NHS staff. So these are modular programmes, and you can take a module, and if you're if you're interested in doing that. In our region, the University of Cambridge is a provider, but there are other providers as well, and you can find out more about those on the Genomics Education Programme website. When it comes to supporting patients, if you see a patient who has been diagnosed with a rare disease or condition, it's really important to help them find the support group. So you can find a relevant support group for them through the Genetic Alliance or through RareConnect, and also for patients who have not received a diagnosis, but where we think there's probably a unifying diagnosis for their symptoms, but we haven't made a diagnosis for them. There is a support group for it's called Syndromes Without a Name, and that's for people who are undiagnosed still. In our region, there's also a regional support group for called CAMRARE, Cambridge Rare Disease Network, or CAMRARE, for families who have rare conditions. So with that, I will say thank you very much. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Feel free to get in touch with me as well.